The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the most important meeting hall in known space. Representatives from dozens of worlds sat in their specialized environment pods, each one designed to keep their unique biology safe from the others. The air recycling systems worked overtime, filtering out toxins that could kill half the species present. Ambassador Velthus materialized in the center holographic projector, and the entire chamber fell silent. The Villani diplomat had always been known for his perfect appearance, his blue skin smooth as polished stone, his movements graceful and calculated. But today something was terribly wrong. Dark crystal growths spread across his face like a disease, pulsing with an eerie inner light. His hands shook as he tried to maintain his composure. Honored members of the council, Velthius began, his normally melodic voice now rough and strained. I come before you not as a diplomat, but as a dying man representing a dying world. Crystal growths on his skin seemed to pulse brighter as he spoke, as feeding off his distress. The chamber erupted in quiet murmurs. The Zephyrian delegates' tentacles curled in anxiety. The silicon-based Krathin shifted their rocky forms uncomfortably. Everyone had heard rumors about the situation on Villani Prime, but seeing their ambassador in this condition made it real. Crystal Plague began 37 days ago in our northern territories, Velthus continued, fighting to keep his voice steady. At first, we thought it was just another mineral bloom, something our terraforming equipment could handle easily. We were wrong, so very wrong. The holographic display behind him shifted to show aerial footage of Villani Prime. What had once been a paradise world of flowing rivers and crystal cities now looked like a nightmare. Massive spires of dark crystal jutted from the ground like twisted spears. Where forests once grew, nothing remained but jagged formations that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Our best scientists worked around the clock, Velthius said, his voice breaking slightly. We sent in research teams with our most advanced containment suits, our finest equipment. The first team lasted 6 hours before the crystals broke through their protective barriers. The second team managed 8 hours. The third, he paused, unable to continue. Dr. Jinwoo Park sat in the human observation section, separate from the main council floor. Humans weren't full members yet. They were too new, too unpredictable for most species' comfort. But as he watched the footage of Villani Prime, something clicked in his mind. The crystal formations looked familiar, almost identical to the extremophile bacterial colonies he'd studied in Earth's deepest ocean trenches. In 17 standard days, Velthius continued, our world will be completely consumed. Our children, our elderly, our entire civilization gone. We've tried everything our science can offer. Containment fields, chemical barriers, even controlled nuclear strikes. Nothing stops it. The plague adapts faster than we can respond. The Villani ambassador's image flickered as the crystal growth spread further across his body. I'm dying. As I speak to you, this transmission may be the last communication Villani Prime ever sends. We beg you, if any species in this great council has knowledge that might save us, please share it. We are willing to try anything. The chamber fell into heavy silence as Velthius's image faded. Council members looked at each other with the grim, understanding that they were witnessing the end of an entire civilization. Their advanced technologies, their centuries of scientific progress, none of it seemed capable of stopping this mysterious plague. Jinwoo Park stood up slowly from his observer seat, his heart pounding. Every alien I turned toward him with surprise and curiosity. The silence in the chamber stretched for what felt like an eternity before Jinwoo Park cleared his throat. All eyes turned toward the human section where he stood alone among empty observer seats. Most species found humans too unpredictable to station more than one representative at council meetings. Honored council members, Jinwoo said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber despite his obvious nervousness. I believe humanity can help with this crisis. The reaction was immediate and far from welcoming. A chorus of clicks, chirps, and mechanical sounds filled the air as dozens of species voiced their disapproval. The Zephyrian delegates' tentacles writhed in what Jinwoo recognized as their version of laughter. Several silicon-based representatives simply turned their rocky forms away. Dismissing him entirely, Counselor Vexter rose from his elevated platform, his 6 legs clicking against the metal floor as he moved. The insectoid being towered over most other representatives, his black carapace gleaming under the chamber's artificial lights, his compound eyes fixed on Jinwoo with what could only be described as condescension. Young human Vexter's voice buzzed through his translator device. Your species has been part of galactic civilization for barely 50 standard years. The Villani have been our allies for over 2 millennia. Their technology is advanced beyond your current understanding. Jinwoo felt his face flush, but he pressed on. With respect, Counselor, advanced technology isn't always the answer. Sometimes you need a different approach entirely. More chittering filled the chamber. The crystalline Etherians chimed in harmonious disapproval, while the gas-based Nebulans created swirling patterns that clearly indicated their skepticism. To them, humans were still the new kids, who had stumbled into space travel through what most considered dumb luck rather than scientific sophistication. Your species lacks the sophisticated containment protocols required for this type of delicate operation, Vexter continued, his mandibles clicking dismissively. The Villani plague requires precision, careful analysis, and sterile environments. Humans are known for their ... chaotic methods. Jinwoo took a deep breath, remembering his training back on Earth. His professors had warned him about galactic prejudice against human methods. But they'd also taught him something the aliens seemed to have forgotten. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. We don't need containment, he replied, his voice growing stronger with conviction. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. If the previous disapproval had been loud, this was deafening. Species that rarely agreed on anything suddenly found common ground in their shock at the human suggestion. The very idea of introducing aggressive tactics into a crisis management scenario went against everything they believed about proper scientific protocol. The Krathan delegates' rocky form actually shifted backward, as if physically recoiling from the suggestion. The aquatic depths dwellers created a series of bubbling sounds that their translators rendered as expressions of horror. Even the usually calm Etherians' crystalline bodies flashed with alarmed colors. Preposterous, buzzed Counselor Vexter, deliberately introducing chaos into a sterile environment. The humans suggest we abandon millions of years of scientific advancement for primitive aggression? But Ambassador Velthius, still flickering weakly in the holographic display, raised a trembling hand. The crystal growths had spread further across his body, even in the short time since his initial plea, and everyone could see he was running out of time. Council members, Velthius whispered, his voice barely audible now. 16 days remain. Our conventional methods have failed completely. Perhaps it is time to consider unconventional solutions. The chamber fell silent again as the weight of desperation settled over them. Time was running out and they had no other options. The Soul Wanderer shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, its hull groaning from the stress of faster-than-light travel. Captain Hyun-woo, Kim gripped his command chair as the ship's artificial gravity system struggled to compensate. Unlike the sleek, silent vessels of other galactic species, human ships were loud, rough, and built for durability rather than comfort. Through the main viewport, Villani Prime hung before them like a diseased jewel. What had once been known as the garden world of the Outer Rim now looked like something from a nightmare. Massive crystal spires, each one taller than Earth's skyscrapers, jutted from the planet's surface at impossible angles. They pulsed with an eerie dark light that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the system's twin suns. Sweet mother of ... whispered Dr. Min-jae Lee from his workstation, his face pressed against the scanner display. The whole northern continent is completely crystallized. Those formations are growing at an exponential rate. The bridge crew fell, silent as they absorbed the scale of destruction. Where satellite images showed sprawling Villani cities just weeks ago, now only jagged crystal forests remained. The planet's once pristine blue oceans had turned a sickly green color, and strange geometric patterns spread across the water's surface like oil spills. "Captain," came a nervous voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the Volani research vessel, Harmony's Light. They're requesting permission to dock and observe our procedures." Hyunwoo nodded grimly. "Grant them permission. They have every right to watch us work." He paused, looking at his small crew of 12 humans. "Remember, people, we're not just representing ourselves here. Every move we make is being judged by species that think we're barely evolved primates with delusions of intelligence." Dr. Minjae opened his sample containment unit, and immediately several crew members stepped back instinctively. The container held a small piece of crystalline material that had been extracted from Volani Prime's atmosphere, a sample that had already killed 3 research teams who tried to study it using conventional methods. "Oh, are you absolutely certain about this approach?" Minjae asked, watching as Hyunwoo began opening the ship's atmospheric vents. "Every protocol we've ever learned says this is suicide." Hyunwoo's hands moved steadily across the controls, deliberately exposing the sample container to the ship's unfiltered atmosphere. The Volani observers, watching through their sterile viewing chamber, began making distressed, chittering sounds. To them, what the humans were doing looked like complete madness. "Trust the process," Hyunwoo replied calmly, pulling out a small vial of brownish liquid. "This is soil bacteria from Earth's Yellowstone volcanic region. It thrives in temperatures that would kill most life forms and loves eating sulfur compounds."
Out.
Without any protective gear beyond basic gloves, he introduced the Earth bacteria directly. To the alien plague sample, the Volani observers pressed themselves against their viewing window in horror, certain they were about to witness the humans' deaths. But instead of spreading through the ship's atmosphere like everyone expected, something extraordinary happened. The crystal sample began to change color, its dark pulsing light flickering and dimming. The Earth bacteria wasn't being destroyed by the plague. It was fighting back. "Possible," whispered Dr. Yathani, the lead Volani observer, her translator. Struggling with her rapid speech, the contamination protocols, the sterile environment requirements. "You're violating every safety standard in galactic scientific code." Engineer Sung-Ho Park looked up from his readings, grinning despite the tension. "That's because galactic scientific code assumes you're dealing with predictable, well-behaved organisms. This plague isn't playing by anyone's rules, so why should we?" The human equipment looked primitive compared to the Volani technology. Rough metal surfaces instead of smooth bioplastics, mechanical switches instead of thought-controlled interfaces. But as the hours passed, the results spoke for themselves. The Earth's bacteria continued to break down the crystal sample, turning its deadly structure into harmless mineral dust. "How is this possible?" Dr. Yathani asked, her voice filled with amazement and fear. "Your methods go against everything we understand about safe laboratory procedures." Hyunwoo smiled as he watched the sample container's readings. "It's exactly the point. Sometimes you have to fight crazy with crazy." Dr. Soo-young Choi hadn't slept in 36 hours, but her eyes were bright with excitement as she burst into the Soul Wanderer's main laboratory. Coffee stains marked her lab coat, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail that had seen better days. The other team members looked up from their workstations, hope flickering in their tired faces. "I've got it," she announced, waving a datapad filled with scrolling numbers and charts. "The plague isn't some super-intelligent organism that can adapt to anything. It's actually incredibly limited in what it can handle." The mixed group of humans and Volani observers gathered around her workstation, where multiple samples sat in various stages of breakdown. Some containers held the original crystal plague material, still pulsing with that eerie dark light. Others contained what looked like ordinary dirt mixed with various Earth-based bacteria cultures. "Look at these readings," Soo-young continued, pointing to her screen. "When we introduce the plague to sterile, controlled environments like the Volani use, it thrives and spreads rapidly. But when we throw it into chaotic biological systems with multiple competing organisms, unpredictable chemical reactions, and constant environmental stress, it completely falls apart." Dr. Yathani, the lead Volani observer, leaned closer. To examine the data, her blue skin had paled to an almost white shade as she processed what she was seeing. This contradicts everything we know about pathogen behavior. Aggressive organisms should adapt to overcome resistance. That's because you've never dealt with anything like Earth, interrupted Sergeant Dong Yun Yun from across the room. Was methodically checking his field equipment. Gear that looked rough and improvised compared to the sleek Villani technology. Your worlds are paradise gardens where everything plays nice with everything else. The sergeant's words made several Villani observers shift uncomfortably. It was true that their worlds were carefully maintained environments where conflicts were rare and biological systems were kept in careful balance. The idea of planets where life forms constantly battled for survival was foreign to them. Is different, continued Engineer Sung-Ho Park, looking up from his own sample analysis. We've got radiation from space, constantly hitting us. Volcanoes erupting without warning, ice ages that wipe out entire species, and bacteria that literally eat rock for breakfast. Our whole planet is basically one big biological battlefield. Edel Fuyang nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. This plague was designed to work in predictable environments. It expects to encounter organized resistance that follows logical patterns. But Earth life doesn't follow any patterns at all. We're random, aggressive, and completely unpredictable. She pulled up another screen showing microscopic footage of Earth bacteria attacking the plague crystals. The tiny organisms swarmed over the crystal structure like an army of ants, breaking it down piece by piece with no coordination or apparent strategy. Yet somehow, their chaotic assault was incredibly effective. We're going to fight this thing the Earth way, declared Dong Yun, strapping on his field pack. Controlled chaos, aggressive response, and acceptable losses. We throw everything we've got at it and see what sticks. The Villani observers looked at each other with obvious confusion and concern. Dr. Yathani spoke for all of them when she asked, "How can you speak of acceptable losses so casually? Every life is precious beyond measure." The humans exchanged glances, and for a moment, the cultural gap between species became painfully obvious. Captain Hyunwoo stepped forward to explain, his voice gentle but firm. "We don't take losses lightly," he said. "But on Earth, we learned long ago that sometimes you have to risk everything to save anything. Our ancestors survived ice ages, volcanic, winters, plague outbreaks, and meteor impacts. We're still here because we learned to make hard choices." Suyang held up a sample container where Earth bacteria had completely broken down a piece of plague crystal into harmless dust. This plague thinks it's fighting a civilized war with rules and predictable responses. We're about to show it what happens when Deathworlders fight dirty. The preliminary results were undeniable. The Earth approach was working where Galactic science had failed completely. The morning briefing aboard the Soul Wanderer carried an air of grim determination. Satellite feeds showed the crystal plague had advanced another 12 kilometers overnight, consuming what remained of Villani Prime's southern agricultural districts. The geometric patterns of crystalline infection now covered nearly 60% of the planet's surface, and the growth rate was still accelerating. Sergeant Gingen Nam stood before the tactical display, her combat gear already strapped on and ready. Unlike the sleek, form-fitting suits used by galactic military forces, human equipment looked bulky and improvised. Layers of radiation shielding, chemical filters, and backup life support systems that had been cobbled together from mining equipment and deep-sea exploration gear. "We're running out of time for safe observations," she announced to the mixed human-alien team. "The plague is adapting faster than our remote sensors can track. We need eyes on the ground in the hot zones." Dr. Yathani, the Villani observer, immediately began protesting. The atmospheric readings show toxic levels that exceed any known survival thresholds. The radiation alone would kill our people in minutes. The chemical compounds being released by the crystals are completely unknown. "Which is exactly why we need to go in person," Jian replied calmly, checking her equipment one final time. "Our sensors can't tell us what we're really dealing with. Sometimes you have to get your hands dirty to understand the enemy." The Villani medical team had set up monitoring stations throughout the ship, their bioscanners focused on the human crew members. To them, what the humans were proposing wasn't just dangerous, it was suicide with extra steps. No galactic species would voluntarily expose themselves to such extreme conditions without absolute certainty of survival. Dr. Taehan. Kong pulled up the real-time atmospheric analysis on his screen, his face grim as he read the numbers. Radiation levels are 3 times higher than what killed the Vellani research teams. Chemical composition includes compounds that dissolve most known protective materials. And the temperature fluctuations would cause thermal shock in any normal physiology. Good thing we're not normal, Gigan said with a grin that didn't quite hide her nervousness. Remember, our ancestors survived the last ice age by eating mammoth meat and sleeping in caves. A little radiation poisoning never stopped a human before. The shuttle bay doors opened with a mechanical groan, revealing the twisted landscape of Vellani Prime below. What had once been rolling hills covered in native vegetation now looked like an alien nightmare. Crystal spires twisted into the sky like frozen screams, their surfaces reflecting distorted images of the toxic clouds that swirled around them. "Radio check," came Jijin's voice through the communication system as her team's shuttle descended toward the planet's surface. Her vital signs appeared on Dr. Taeyan's monitor, heart rate elevated but steady. Oxygen levels normal, radiation exposure climbing but still within human tolerance limits. The Vellani. The medical staff watched their screens in amazement as the human readings remained stable even as environmental conditions exceeded their equipment's ability to measure. Dr. Yathani kept checking her instruments, certain they must be malfunctioning. "Atmospheric composition is worse than expected," Jian reported, her voice crackling through interference from the crystal formations. "But we're managing. These suits are holding up better than predicted." Through the shuttle's camera feed, the team could see the infected landscape up close. The crystal formations weren't just growing randomly. They formed complex geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with coordinated rhythm. Like a massive organism breathing in slow motion, crystals are creating their own weather system. Gian continued, her voice steady, despite walking through an environment that would have been instantly lethal to most galactic species. Temperature variations, atmospheric pressure changes, even localized gravity fluctuations. This isn't just a plague, it's terraforming technology. Dr. Taeyan monitored her vital signs as she pushed deeper into the infected zone, watching her body adapt to conditions that defied galactic understanding of biological limits. Your radiation exposure is approaching critical levels. Most species would be experiencing cellular breakdown by now. Most species didn't evolve on a planet that tried to kill them every single day, she replied, her breathing only slightly labored. "We need to go deeper. There's something at the center of this pattern that we're missing." Lieutenant Yojin Song crouched behind a twisted metal structure that had once been part of a Vellani research station. Her radiation detector was clicking, so rapidly it sounded like static, and the air around her shimmered with heat distortion from the massive crystal formation towering overhead. Through her helmet's heads-up display, she could see readings that would have sent any sensible person running in the opposite direction. "Command, are you getting this data?" She whispered into her radio, trying to keep her voice steady despite what she was seeing. The crystal spire in front of her wasn't just growing randomly, it was following a precise geometric pattern, with each new growth adding to what looked like a massive three-dimensional blueprint. Dr. Taeyan's voice crackled. "Through the interference? We're receiving your transmission, but the readings don't make sense. Those formations are generating their own electromagnetic field." Yojin crawled closer to the base of the crystal structure, where strange symbols were etched into the surface. They weren't random scratches, they were clearly deliberate markings, almost like circuit diagrams carved in stone. As she watched, new symbols appeared, glowing briefly before fading into the crystal's dark surface. "This isn't just a disease," she transmitted, her voice filled with sudden understanding. "It's a terraforming weapon. These formations are trying to create a specific atmospheric composition. Look at the gas analysis readings. The crystals are converting the planet's atmosphere into something completely different." Back aboard the Soul Wanderer, the revelation hit the human team like a physical blow. Captain Hyunwoo stared at the incoming data, his mind racing through the implications. If Yojin was right, they weren't dealing with a natural plague that had somehow gotten out of control. They were fighting against a deliberate weapons system designed by an intelligence that had planned this exact scenario. Dr. Suyang pulled up her historical databases, searching through galactic records for any mention of terraforming weapons. There are legends about the Vorthok Empire, she said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. They supposedly disappeared about 50,000 years ago. The stories say they were warriors who could reshape entire worlds to match their biology. So we're fighting ghosts, muttered Sergeant Dong-Yoon, checking his equipment with grim determination. Dead aliens who left behind weapons that are still trying to complete their mission 50 millennia later. The Villani observers watched in fascination and growing alarm as the humans began shifting from scientific analysis to what looked like military planning. Dr. Yathani had never seen researchers transform so quickly into soldiers, their entire demeanor changing as they processed this new information. Time to introduce this thing to some Earth-style biological warfare, announced Dr. Sang-Hoon Lee, moving to his specialized containment units with the purposeful stride of someone preparing for battle. Inside the containers, cultures of extremophile bacteria bubbled and grew, organisms that thrived in conditions that would kill almost any other life form. These beauties come from the deepest parts of Earth's ocean, he explained to the stunned alien observers. They eat sulfur, love radiation, and think boiling acid is a nice warm bath. If the Vorthok weapon system thinks it can outcompete Earth biology, it's about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The human team began working with methodical precision, but their approach looked nothing like the careful, sterile procedures the galactic community considered proper science. Instead, they moved like a military unit preparing for combat, with each team member handling multiple tasks simultaneously and no wasted motion. We're not treating this as a contamination problem anymore, Captain Hyun-woo announced to his crew. We're treating it as an invasion. The enemy has had 50,000 years to perfect their weapon, but they never planned on encountering anything like Earth. Engineer Suno began modifying the ship's atmospheric processors, turning them into delivery systems for the bacterial cultures. If this thing wants to terraform a planet, let's show it what happens when Earth's ecosystem fights back. Alien observers could only watch in amazement as the humans prepared their counterattack with the efficiency of a species that had learned warfare from surviving on the galaxy's most dangerous world. The first rays of Villani Prime's twin suns painted the crystal-infected landscape in shades of orange and red as the Soul Wanderer's launch bay doors slid open. Captain Hyun-woo stood in the ship's command center, surrounded by screens showing tactical positions across the planet's surface. His crew moved around him with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had trained for this moment their entire lives. All teams. This is command. Hyun-woo spoke into his headset, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned leadership in Earth's harshest environments. Weather conditions are optimal, when patterns will carry our biological agents deep into the infected zones. Remember, we get one shot at this. 6 modified atmospheric shuttles descended toward the planet simultaneously, each one carrying containers of Earth's most extreme life forms. Unlike the sleek, silent craft used by other galactic species, the human shuttles roared through the toxic atmosphere with engines that sounded like controlled explosions. Dr. Sang-Hoon monitored the deployment from his mobile laboratory, watching as the first wave of containers opened in the planet's upper atmosphere. Tardigrade deployment successful, he reported, his voice tight with concentration. These little guys have survived the vacuum of space and direct radiation exposure. A little alien crystal plague should be like a vacation for them. The tardigrades, microscopic creatures that looked like tiny water bears, began their descent through Villani Prime's poisoned atmosphere. Each one was smaller than a grain of sand, but they carried the genetic heritage of a species that had survived every mass extinction event in Earth's history. Alpha Team, deploy the extremophiles at coordinates 779, Hyun-woo commanded, watching as Lieutenant Yojin's shuttle approached the largest concentration of crystal formations. These bacteria have been modified to eat silicon compounds and thrive in high radiation environments. The first deployment canisters hit the crystal formations with small explosions that sent clouds of modified Earth bacteria into the air. Unlike the sterile, controlled releases that galactic science preferred, this looked more like carpet bombing with microscopic weapons. Beta Team, Release the fungal spores at the northern crystalline cluster, Hunhua continued, his tactical display showing the positions of all 6 teams across the planet's surface. Remember, these fungi have been engineered to be aggressive. They won't just survive in this environment, they'll actively hunt down and consume the crystal structures. Aboard the monitoring ships positioned safely in orbit, representatives from dozens of galactic species watched in amazement and horror as the human plan unfolded. The Zephyrian delegates' tentacles curled in anxiety as they observed the chaotic deployment methods. The crystalline Etherians flashed warning colors as they processed what they were seeing. "This violates every protocol for biological containment," whispered Counselor Vexler, his compound eyes fixed on the tactical displays. "They're essentially carpet bombing an entire planet with unknown organisms." But Dr. Yathani, who had spent weeks observing human methods, found herself fascinated rather than horrified. "Look at the immediate results," she said, pointing to her scanner readings. "The crystal formations are already showing signs of breakdown. On the planet's surface, the Earth's organisms began their work with the relentless efficiency that had allowed life to survive on humanity's harsh homeworld. The tardigrades settled into the crystal structures like they were moving into new homes, their nearly indestructible bodies allowing them to work in conditions that would kill any other known life form. The modified bacteria swarmed over the crystal surfaces in visible clouds, breaking down the alien minerals and converting them into harmless compounds. The aggressive fungi spread through the underground root systems of the crystal formations, attacking them from within like a biological infection fighting another infection. "Command, this is Gamma Team," came Sergeant Gion's voice through the radio. "Crystals are actually retreating from our deployment zones. The fungal spores are spreading faster than the plague can adapt to them." For the first time since the crisis began, the crystal plague's relentless advance slowed. Satellite readings showed the infected areas actually shrinking as Earth's biological weapons consumed the alien structures from every direction. The galactic observers could only watch in stunned silence as the humans achieved in hours what their advanced technology had failed to accomplish in weeks. The celebration aboard the Soul Wanderer was short-lived. Just as the human team began to believe they had won, the planet's surface erupted in a display of terrifying beauty. Massive columns of poisonous gas shot into the atmosphere from the remaining crystal cores, creating towering spires of death. That could be seen from orbit. "What the hell is that?" shouted Engineer Sunjo, his instruments going crazy as they tried to measure the toxic clouds spreading across Villani Prime's surface. The readings were so extreme that several monitoring systems simply shut down, rather than process the impossible data. Dr. Su Yang stared at her screens in disbelief. "It's a fail-safe mechanism. Weapon system realized it was losing, so it's releasing everything it has left in one final attack." She paused, her face pale as she processed the implications. Those toxin concentrations would kill any known galactic species instantly. We're talking about chemical compounds that break down cellular structure at the molecular level. The Villani observers aboard their monitoring ships watched in horror as their homeworld disappeared beneath clouds of poisonous gas. Dr. Yathani pressed her hands against the viewing window, tears streaming down her blue face as she realized that even if the humans defeated the plague, nothing would survive this final toxic assault. "The cores are buried deep underground," announced Dr. Yunhai Park, studying the tactical readouts with grim determination. She had been working on experimental medical treatments designed to help humans survive in impossible conditions, treatments that had never been tested in real combat situations. "Those aren't just random gas emissions," she continued, pointing to the patterns emerging from the planet's surface. "The remaining crystal cores are coordinating their release. They're trying to create a planet-wide toxic atmosphere that will kill everything and then terraform the world according to their original programming." Captain Hyunwoo looked at his small team of humans, knowing what he was about to ask of them. "How close do we need to get to plant the final biological charges?" "Direct contact with the cores," Yunhai replied quietly. "Someone has to physically enter those toxic zones and place the modified organisms directly onto the crystal structures. The atmospheric interference is too intense for remote deployment." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. What she was describing wasn't just dangerous, it was a suicide mission with extra steps. The toxic concentrations pouring from the crystal cores would kill any living thing within minutes. Even with the best protective equipment, "We're going in," Yunhai announced, checking her experimental medical treatments one final time. The syringes contained cocktails of drugs and genetic therapies that had been developed from Earth's most extreme survival adaptations, treatments that might keep a human alive long enough to complete the mission. "You can't be serious," Dr. Yathani whispered, her translator struggling with her rapid, panicked speech. "The toxin levels would dissolve your protective suits in seconds. Your bodies would shut down before you could even reach the cores." Dong Yun was already suiting up, his movements calm and methodical, despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. "That's the thing about humans," he said, checking his equipment one final time. "We're really, really hard to kill. Our ancestors survived ice ages, volcanic winters, and radiation exposure that should have wiped us out. A little alien poison gas is just another Tuesday for us." The human team began their final preparations with the quiet efficiency of people who had accepted their likely fate. They injected themselves with Yunhee's experimental treatments, knowing that the drugs were as likely to kill them as save them. They checked their equipment, knowing it probably wouldn't be enough. They said their goodbyes, knowing they probably wouldn't see each other again. The galactic observers could only watch in stunned silence as the humans voluntarily entered the toxic storm. Their willingness to sacrifice themselves for beings they had known for mere weeks, defying every logical understanding of species survival behavior. Within hours, the crystalline cores began collapsing as Earth's most aggressive organisms, delivered by human hands, consumed them from within. The morning sun rose over Villani Prime. For the first time in 3 months without being filtered through clouds of toxic crystal formations, Dr. Yathani stood at the observation deck of the Villani medical ship, hardly believing what her instruments were telling her. The atmospheric readings showed clean air, normal radiation levels, and no trace of the crystalline plague that had nearly destroyed her world. Below on the planet's surface, small green shoots were already beginning to emerge from the soil, where the massive crystal spires had stood just days before. The Earth organisms hadn't just destroyed the alien weapon system, they had actually improved the soil composition, leaving behind nutrients that would help the planet recover faster than anyone had thought possible. How many of them survived? Dr. Yathani asked quietly, referring to the human assault team that had voluntarily entered the toxic storm 3 days earlier. Captain Hyanwoo's voice came through the communication system, tired but triumphant. "All 12 team members made it out alive. Dr. Yunhai's experimental treatments worked better than we hoped. We've got some radiation poisoning, chemical burns, and 1 case of severe toxin exposure, but everyone's going to recover." The Galactic Council had called an emergency session aboard their flagship. The atmosphere in the Grand Chamber was completely different from the dismissive attitude they had shown toward humanity just weeks earlier. Representatives from dozens of species sat in respectful silence. As the results of the human mission were presented, Counselor Vexther, the same insectoid being who had scoffed at human capabilities, now stood before the assembly with his compound, eyes focused directly on the human delegation. His mandibles clicked in what his species considered a gesture of deep respect. "The Galactic Council hereby establishes Earth as the official emergency response center for Class X impossible threats," he announced, his translator carrying the weight of this historic moment. "When conventional wisdom fails, when our most advanced technologies prove inadequate, we will call upon the humans and their unique approach to problem solving." The chamber erupted in approving sounds from dozens of different species. Zephyrian delegates' tentacles swayed in rhythmic appreciation. The crystalline Etherians flashed brilliant colors of respect and gratitude. Even the gas-based nebulans created swirling patterns that clearly indicated their approval. Dr. Jinwoo Park, the same human observer who had first volunteered humanity's help, stood to address the council. "We accept this responsibility," he said simply. "Earth has always been a world where impossible situations require impossible solutions. We're honored to serve." Back on Villani Prime, construction crews were already working to erect monuments in the capital city's central plaza. The statues would depict the 12 humans who had walked into certain death to save a world they had never seen before the crisis began. The inscription, written in both Villani script and Earth's common languages, would read, "To the humans, who taught us that sometimes salvation comes from the most unlikely sources." Captain Hunwo gathered his team aboard the Soul Wanderer as they prepared to depart. Their ship looked even more battered than when they had arrived, with scorch marks from toxic exposure and equipment that had been pushed far beyond its design limits. But the crew spirits were high as they reviewed their mission reports. "So what's next?" asked Dr. Suyang, looking up from her biological samples with the satisfied expression of someone who had just solved an impossible puzzle. Dr. Ginwu smiled as he gestured toward the communication station, where dozens of emergency transmissions were already queuing up in their system. Requests for help were pouring in from across the galaxy, situations that conventional galactic science had deemed hopeless. Problems that required the kind of controlled insanity that only humans seemed capable of providing. "Looks like we've got a reputation to maintain," Hunu said, settling into his captain's chair. "The galaxy just learned that when you need something impossible done, you call the crazy species from the Death World." As the Soul Wanderer jumped to hyperspace toward their next impossible mission, the human crew knew they had fundamentally changed humanity's place in the galactic community. They were no longer the primitive newcomers who barely understood advanced technology. They were the specialists you called when everything else had failed. The heroes from hell who could succeed where others couldn't even survive.